Tomorrow is Memorial Day. We all know what that three-cornered flag represents. We've been celebrating Memorial Day in this country since May 30th, 1866. It was set up for Americans to honor the casualties of the Civil War. It was 134 years ago. Memorial Day was always celebrated on May 30th until, I think it was the early 60s, when they changed it to be a legal holiday. Instead of being called Decoration Day, it was then labeled Memorial Day. It was scheduled to be on the last Monday in May to give people a 3-day weekend. Do you ever stop and think or wonder how many casualties this country has endured since our conception in 1776? Well, I just happened to look it up. They don't give a total, but they have all the different conflicts and wars that we've endured these last 240-some years. The total number of casualties was 1.3 million. And along with those casualties, there were about 3 million wounded. And of those, approximately 750,000 came back with permanent, life-altering disabilities. No arms, no legs, hand gone, brain damage. That's 200 million people that either gave their lives or wound up seriously disabled in the service of this country. I'm going to tell you a story this morning. I was a load master on C-130s back in from 1966 to 1970. And I was attached to the 47th Tactical Airlift Squadron based in Topeka, Kansas. And our squadron did 6-week temporary duty. We call them TDY rotations, 6 weeks at a time. We'd go to Panama and serve the Southern Command for 6 weeks. We'd go to Europe for 6 weeks. We'd go to Vietnam for 6 weeks. Sometimes we did week-long stints in between that, where we'd go to like Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and practice dropping the 101st Airborne. My job was to load the airplane with people or cargo or paratroopers, and then deliver the cargo or the people, or airdrop equipment, or drop paratroopers. It was, I think, in November of 1968. I was in Vietnam, my crew was, and we were flying into a little fire base called Tuy Hoa by the demilitarized zone. And on our final approach for landing, we were shot down. We wound up about 1,000 yards from the end of the runway, which was just a bulldozed flat spot in the jungle. I was the only one on our crew that was seriously injured. And I was air evac'd out of Vietnam, wound up in Tokyo, and then down at Lackland, and then finally back at Topeka, Kansas. And since I was going to be grounded for at least 6 months, I was replaced on my crew, because crews were usually kept together for the added proficiency that they could develop. And I'd been in the hospital for several months, and I'd gotten out and I went home. It wasn't long after that I had a dream in the middle of the night. And I was in deep black water, and I was drowning. And I wasn't alone. I was in the water, and I looked and I saw my pilot, Captain Paul Sally, and my flight engineer, Tom Ashcraft. And we were very close, and we were just staring at each other. I woke up. I was terrified. Well, a couple days went by, and I got a call from Sergeant Williams. We all called him Willie. He was the scheduler for our squadron. And my crew, I had been replaced on it, but my crew had been sent to Okinawa for 6 weeks. And while there, they were flying missions on aircraft we called Sneaky Petes at the time. They were C-130s, equipped with a couple of machine guns, but mostly camera, spy equipment. And he said, I've got some bad news. Your crew were flying a Sneaky Pete mission over North Korea, and they got caught. And the North Korean fighters followed them out, and about 10 miles out at sea, they shot them down. He said there were no survivors. I said, when was that? He said, a couple days ago. I knew it. Something changed in me that day. I requested a job change. I requested the opportunity to cross-train, take a bypass test. My folks had a print shop. I was a good printer. I wanted to transfer into the base print shop because there was something inside of me, and it wasn't fear, but I could not participate in the ruthless activity of war. I couldn't be a part of that any longer. So I finished out the last year and 3 months of my stint in the Air Force working in the base print shop in Topeka, Kansas. People thought I was crazy. When you're on air crew, you get flight pay, hazardous duty pay. You don't have to go to roll call. If you're not flying, you're off. You make more money and you have better duty than anybody in the Air Force. But I couldn't participate. So tomorrow's Memorial Day. When we turn on our televisions, we're going to see all manner of people, politicians, ministers, orators, say some lovely words about the men and women who have died in the service of this country. And they're going to say something, we owe them our respect. And our honor. And we owe them so much. Well, I have a question. When are we going to start paying up on what we owe? 2 million people in this country, in its short 240-year history, have given their lives or become maimed, seriously disabled, not just to win a piece of dirt on some battlefield, but to allow us progress and learn as a human society that nothing has ever been accomplished in the name of good from a war. We've all heard the old saying that to the victor go the spoils. What a perfect word, that word spoils. Because in any victory, of war, all you get has been spoiled. It's been spoiled by grief, by hatred, by revenge, by destruction. War has never brought about anything good. Isn't it time we transcended that barbaric behavior of slaughtering each other? Isn't it time we learned that we do have the capacity to live together on this planet in a state of peace? I was always so impressed by a little old lady. I don't remember her name, but I'm sure we've all heard of her. I'm sure she's passed away by now. But for years, decades, she walked across this country and she called herself the Peace Pilgrim, trying to encourage people to step out of the revenge and the consciousness of force and violence, to encourage us to live in peace. I think it's time for all of us to start paying our debt to all the people that have died in wars. You know, we're a large country. They say the most powerful in the world. In our 234-year history, 244-year history, we've lost 2 million people, you might say. And since the Civil War, we've never had a war on our homeland, in our boundaries, in our country. Second World War alone, Russia lost something like 17 million people. Germany was like 10 or 12 million people. Europe was in the millions. Japan, tens of millions. And in the last 250 years, China has lost millions and millions of people. Have we learned anything by this loss of life? Has it accomplished to bring about peace on this planet? I've talked a lot about lately the United Nations, how it was formed in, I think, 47 or 48. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, folks. It's already out there. It's actually, the plan is already in place. I want to read you something. The United Nations Charter was made up of 111 articles. And the very first article, Article 1, is the purpose of the United Nations are to maintain international peace and security, and to that end, to take effective collective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to that peace, and for the suppression of acts of aggression or other breaches of the peace, and to bring about by peaceful means and in a community with the principles of justice and international law, adjustment or settlement of international disputes or situations which might lead to a breach of the peace. Number 2, to develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principles of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, and to take other appropriate measures to strengthen universal peace. Number 3, to achieve international cooperation in solving international problems of an economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian character, and in promoting and encouraging respect for human rights and for fundamental freedoms for all, without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. And finally, number 4, to be a center for the harmonizing the actions of nations in the attainment of these common ends. Can't we do that? Can't we all agree, all of the countries that have lost hundreds of millions of people to force and violence and war, can't we do that? Can't we spend the effort? We spend not a lot of effort making war machines and weaponry. We spend billions and billions and trillions of dollars to kill each other off. We have teams of scientists and sociologists and psychiatrists and all kinds of specialists to figure out how to wage war. Can't we put that same effort into bringing about world peace? Just before he died, FDR wrote a second Bill of Rights. And his wife, Eleanor, took that to the UN and had it incorporated to the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. And I talked about that a few weeks back. I'm going to read these 8 points that FDR wrote, the second Bill of Rights. The right to a useful and remunerative job in the industries or shops or farms or mines of this nation. 2, the right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation. Number 3, the right of every farmer to raise and sell his products at a return which will give him and his family a decent living. 4, the right of every business, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad. 5, the right of every family to a decent home. 6, the right to adequate medical care and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health. 7, the right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, or accident and unemployment. And 8, the right to a good education. That's what 2 million Americans sacrifice so much for, that we could live together peaceably with certain rights and freedom. I do think it's time we started paying our debt, showing what we owe to these men and women who have given so much. Not just sit at home on our butts and complaining about how bad things are and how hopeless it might be. To take the first step, all we need is just one little bit of courage. I think it was Aristotle said, you will never do anything in the world without courage. Take a little bit of courage, my friends, and bring about some peace in the battles waging within inside you right now, between your heart and your mind. Work on making yourself peaceful inside. Then maybe take another little bit of courage and work at repairing an adversarial or a messed up relationship. Then take a little bit more courage and start talking to your local government, your state government, and your federal government. Let them know that all these people didn't die for constant force and violence, that force and violence is not an acceptable behavior from the leaders of this country. It's not an acceptable behavior for our local government or our local police. It's not an acceptable behavior for people, period. Take a little more courage and Let Hollywood know you're tired of the violent force and violence where the good guys blow stuff up. Take a little more courage and get a hold of Silicon Valley and tell them that they can stop making all these video games, conditioning to our children, telling our children that force and violence and ruthlessness is okay. It's not. It's not okay. I was having a conversation with Vivian quite recently. We were talking about this sort of thing. And she said, you know, sometimes over the years, I've thought it might be entirely possible that the plan for humanity is to be in this constant chaos, constant war. Might be. I don't know. But I will tell you that I don't want to live in a world without hope. And as long as I'm breathing air, I'm going to try. Yes, I talk about a lot of stuff, but we can fix it. Like Barack Obama said, yes, we can. All it takes is a little courage, a little bit of incentive. We can change our world, starting with our inside, if we will let the light of hope and the light of the divine, peace and love and compassion and acceptance and understanding, if we will let that light shine our path, others will see that light as well. We have a lot of freedom in this country, a lot more than most people in the world. My friends, I think it's time we start exercising some of that freedom and do whatever we can, in whatever way, to start paying our debt to our fallen veterans, to start bringing about what we believe is the way that humans are supposed to be, like every other creature on this planet. We're supposed to live together in harmony. Problems, there'll always be problems. Unseen things, pandemics, there'll always be things. That's part of our human condition, for sure. But we choose to have war, and we don't have to. I'm going to read a couple of quotes. Eleanor Roosevelt said, freedom makes a huge requirement of every human being. With that freedom comes responsibility. And Bob Dylan wrote, a hero is someone who understands the responsibility that comes with his freedom. I'm going to leave you with a quote. Bill Clinton has not been one of my favorite human beings, but the man is incredibly brilliant. And he said something that I hope we will all consider and ponder tomorrow as we celebrate Memorial Day. As we're thinking about the price that has been paid for us to live in this beautiful country. Bill said, there is nothing wrong with America that cannot be cured with what is right in America. We have so much potential to bring about peace and harmony and empathy and acceptance. The divine allows us that power to change our own lives and the lives of those around us. And together, the good in America can change the world by shining the light of hope and love. And so it is.